The Last Great Hostess: How Edith of Londonderry Turned a Diamond Collection into a Political Weapon in the Years Between the Two World Wars. One woman's jewelry box was powerful enough to help set the tone of British politics. Edith, Marchioness of Londonderry, did not simply wear diamonds. She deployed them, tier upon glittering tier, at exactly the receptions where cabinet ministers, foreign statesmen, and the first Labour Prime Minister in British history mingled under the same roof. Much of what she wore had been collected by her husband's ancestors from tsars, Austrian counts, and society jewelers over the preceding century, and today those same pieces sit quietly behind museum glass at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Admired by visitors who mostly have no idea how much political theater they once helped stage. Edith Helen Chaplin was born on 3 December 1878 at Blankney in Lincolnshire, the elder daughter and second of 3 children of Henry Chaplin, a wealthy landowner and conservative politician who served in cabinet and was later created the first Viscount Chaplin. And Lady Florence Sutherland Levison Gower, daughter of the 3rd Duke of Sutherland, then reckoned the largest private landowner in Britain. Her mother died in October 1881 when Edith was not yet 3 years old, and much of her childhood afterward was spent at Dunrobin Castle in Sutherland, Scotland, the vast Sutherland family seat, under the care of her grandparents. While her time in London was spent living with them at Stafford House, a grand mansion later renamed Lancaster House. She appears to have been educated privately at home rather than at any formal school, in the manner typical of aristocratic girls of her generation, and grew up surrounded by 2 of the wealthiest and most politically connected families in Victorian Britain. An upbringing that gave her an early, practical education and exactly the kind of high society entertaining she would later make her own signature. On 28 November 1899, at the age of 20, she married Charles Vane Tempest Stuart, then known by the courtesy title Viscount Castlereagh, heir to one of Britain's wealthiest and most politically connected aristocratic dynasties, whose family seat included both Londonderry House on Park Lane and Mount Stewart in County Down, Northern Ireland. He succeeded his father as the 7th Marquess of Londonderry in 1915, at which point Edith formally became Marchioness of Londonderry, a title she would hold for the rest of her life. On her husband's death in 1949, she became Dowager Marchioness. During the First World War, she was appointed Colonel-in-Chief of the Women's Volunteer Reserve, one of several organizations formed to mobilize women into roles vacated by men serving at the front, an early sign of the organizational energy that would later define her social and political career. In the interwar years, she emerged as one of the most influential society hostesses in Britain, using her family's London residence, Londonderry House, as a venue for lavish receptions that doubled as genuine sites of political networking, bringing together politicians from across party lines, including a close and unusual friendship with Ramsay MacDonald, Britain's first Labour Prime Minister, at a time when aristocratic hostesses and socialist politicians rarely moved in the same circles. And when such a friendship was considered notable enough to attract comment from contemporary political observers. She and her husband had 5 children together: Maureen, Robin, who succeeded as 8th Marquess of Londonderry, Margaret, Helen, and Mary, the youngest, whose own wedding gift jewelry would later intersect with her mother's collection. Beyond politics and jewelry, Edith was also a serious gardener and something of a published author, writing and editing several books over her lifetime, including a memoir of her father and an account of her own husband's ancestor, Frances Anne, whose jewels form much of this story. She developed the celebrated gardens at Mount Stewart into what horticultural experts have since called one of the finest gardens in Europe, employing around 20 gardeners at the project's peak before the estate, garden included, was handed over to the National Trust in 1957, 2 years before her death. She died of cancer on 23 April 1959 at Mount Stewart, aged 80. Having outlived her husband by a decade and having spent virtually her entire adult life as one of the most recognizable aristocratic women in 20th century Britain. What makes Edith such a distinctive figure in the history of British aristocratic jewelry is the sheer diplomatic and dynastic range of the pieces she inherited. Unlike collections built up by a single generation, the Londonderry jewels Edith wore had been assembled across nearly a century by her husband's forebears, arriving from sources as varied as a Russian Tsar, an Austrian Count, and the diplomatic circuit of early 19th century Vienna, long before she herself was born. By the time these pieces reached her, in the early 20th century, she was inheriting not simply valuable stones, but a physical record of nearly 100 years of European aristocratic and royal contact. Much of it tied to specific coronations, diplomatic missions, and society events that had shaped the Vane Tempest Stuart family's standing in British public life. Long predating her own arrival into the family by marriage, Edith's own contribution to that story was less about acquiring entirely new pieces and more about knowing precisely how to deploy the ones she already had. She became known, according to those who wrote about her afterward, for her skill in reconfiguring the same core set of jewels into different forms, depending on the occasion, turning a tiara into a stomacher, incorporating loose stones into a hat, or splitting a large brook into 3 smaller ones, a kind of practical, hands-on relationship with her own jewelry box that went well beyond simply wearing whatever a lady's maid laid out for her. That flexibility mattered enormously for a hostess whose entire social strategy depended on being visually memorable at an enormous number of different events each season, from formal coronations to intimate dinners to the annual ceremonial opening of Parliament, without ever appearing to simply repeat the same look twice. At a time when society journalists scrutinized aristocratic dress with the same attention now reserved for red carpet fashion, that instinct for presentation extended well beyond jewelry. Edith was, by most contemporary accounts, an unusually deliberate self-fashioner even among a generation of aristocratic women famous for their attention to appearance, treating her wardrobe, her jewelry, and even her choice of dinner guests as elements of a single coordinated performance of aristocratic authority. Her books, including a memoir of her own father and later a study of Frances Anne, the ancestor whose jewels dominate this collection, suggest a woman who understood her family's material and social history well enough to write about it seriously. Rather than simply inheriting it passively, as self-awareness about legacy that likely shaped exactly how and when she chose to display particular pieces in public. The clearest illustration of how deliberately Edith used her jewelry collection came at the state opening of Parliament in 1948, the first full ceremonial opening held after the Second World War. An occasion loaded with symbolic weight for a Britain still rebuilding from wartime austerity and rationing, and eager for visible signs that its older constitutional traditions had survived intact. For that event, held in the House of Lords, Edith wore the magnificent Londonderry diamond stomacher, a piece first worn by Teresa, the 6th Marchioness of Londonderry. For a series of formal portraits in 1889 and 1891, and famously worn by the earlier Frances Anne, 3rd Marchioness of Londonderry, when she dressed as Empress Maria Theresa of Austria for the celebrated Devonshire House Ball of 1897. One of the most extravagant and widely reported costume balls of the Victorian era, attended by much of fashionable London in historically themed fancy dress. Alongside the stomacher, Edith also wore the striking Cartier emerald corsage bracelet at that same 1948 opening, a 1930s creation built around a large cabochon emerald believed to have been acquired by Cartier directly from an Indian Maharaja, its wide band of circular cut and baguette diamonds framing the stone in a geometric setting typical of the era's Art Deco taste. And given to her as a gift by Mrs. James Corrigan, a wealthy American society figure well known in the same interwar social circles Edith herself moved through, choosing to combine a mid-Victorian stomacher built from diamonds that had already survived one coronation and one legendary costume ball with a distinctly modern 1930s Art Deco bracelet for a single formal appearance in 1948. Was itself a small but telling statement. It showed a woman entirely comfortable pairing pieces from wildly different eras and design traditions, using her family's historic inheritance alongside her own more contemporary acquisitions, rather than treating either category as more authentically hers than the other. The significance of this moment lies in what it reveals about how aristocratic jewelry functioned as a genuine instrument of soft political power in 20th century Britain. The 1948 state opening was not simply a fashion occasion. It was the first full return of a centuries-old constitutional ceremony after a war that had suspended or scaled back many such rituals. And Edith's choice to appear in a stomacher, whose stones traced back to a diamond belt worn at the coronation of William IV in 1831, was, whether consciously intended or not, a visual statement about continuity, the reassertion of an unbroken aristocratic and constitutional order at the exact moment post-war Britain needed reassurance that such continuity still existed. Wearing jewelry this historically loaded to an occasion this symbolically important turned Edith's collection, for one evening, into something closer to a piece of state theater than mere personal adornment. A visual argument for stability delivered without a single word being spoken. More broadly, Edith's jewelry collection matters because of how directly it intersects with the actual history of European diplomacy. The Siberian amethysts, the Vienna-sourced Guelph and emerald parures, and the turquoise set acquired from an Austrian count were not simply beautiful objects. Each arrived in the Londonderry family precisely because Frances Anne's husband, the third Marquess, held a series of significant diplomatic posts across early 19th century Europe, including in Vienna during the Congress era, when European courts routinely exchanged extraordinarily valuable gifts as instruments of goodwill and influence, part of the same broader system of personal diplomacy through which monarchs and their representatives built and maintained alliances outside formal treaties. Edith's later careful public display of these same pieces, deliberately choosing the amethyst stomacher for a parliamentary reception or the turquoise parure for a formal family portrait, kept that diplomatic history visibly alive for a British public a century later. Long after the original circumstances of the Congress of Vienna had faded from most people's memory, functioning almost as an informal, wearable archive of a diplomatic era few outside specialist historians would otherwise remember in any detail. There is, too, a specifically political dimension worth naming. Edith's friendship with Ramsay MacDonald meant that pieces from this same historically loaded collection were, on occasion, on display at gatherings that brought together a Labour Prime Minister with figures from the most traditional wing of the British aristocracy, at a moment when many on both sides viewed such mixing with real suspicion. A collection this steeped in monarchist and diplomatic history, worn casually at receptions attended by socialist politicians, says something quietly revealing about interwar Britain's genuine appetite for social and political bridge building, even across divides that contemporary commentary often treated as unbridgeable. Not everything about this collection's history is neatly settled, and some of the most interesting tensions concern authorship and attribution rather than ownership. The Londonderry tiara's construction history, for instance, involves at least two slightly different dates in different accounts of its commissioning, sometimes given as 1853, sometimes 1854, a minor but genuine inconsistency typical of jewelry this old, where court records, family letters, and later retrospective accounts do not always agree precisely on when a commission was placed versus when a piece was completed and first worn. Historians researching the piece generally treat the mid-1850s as the safest working range rather than insisting on a single exact year, and similar small discrepancies appear elsewhere in the collection's documentation, including uncertainty over precisely which year some of the Guelph Peru's individual elements were acquired during the third Marquess's time in Vienna. Since diplomatic gifts of this kind were not always formally recorded at the moment of exchange, there is a more substantial tension around the family's broader relationship to public scrutiny of its jewelry in more recent decades. A number of gifts given to Edith personally by figures including Queen Mary and the diplomat and art collector Sir Philip Sassoon were eventually sold at Sotheby's in 2012, more than half a century after her death. A decision that inevitably raises the same question that surrounds so many great aristocratic collections, whether pieces this historically and diplomatically significant are better. Served remaining in private family hands, passed down quietly through inheritance, or whether public sale and eventual acquisition by museums or private collectors who can properly document and display them actually serves history better in the long run. The family's own choice to place both the Londonderry tiara and the diamond stomacher on loan for public exhibition, rather than keeping them locked away entirely in private use, suggests they have generally leaned toward the latter view, treating these objects as historically significant enough to merit public access, even while formal ownership remains within the family. A middle path between total privacy and outright sale that not every comparable aristocratic collection has managed to strike. A further, quieter tension concerns how much of Edith's own personal jewelry wearing history can actually be verified against surviving photographs and portraits, as opposed to family tradition and later retrospective accounts. The Burmese ruby earrings, for example, carry a documented provenance linking them to the wider Londonderry collection, and by extension, to Edith. Yet no photograph or contemporary record has ever surfaced showing her actually wearing that specific pair, a gap that auction houses are typically careful to flag rather than paper over. That kind of honest uncertainty, present even within a collection as generally well documented as this one, is a useful reminder that aristocratic jewelry history, however richly recorded, is rarely as completely verifiable as a museum label might suggest. The story properly begins with Frances Anne, 3rd Marchioness of Londonderry, one of the wealthiest women in Victorian Britain in her own right through her inherited coal and shipping interests in the north of England, who in the mid-1850s commissioned the Londonderry tiara from the crown jewelers Gerard. Built around what became known as the down diamond stones that had originally formed part of the dowry brought into the family by Mary Cowan, wife of Robert Stewart and mother of the first Marquess of Londonderry. Those same diamonds had earlier adorned a spectacular diamond belt worn by Frances Anne herself at the coronation of King William IV in 1831, decades before they were reworked into the tiara that would eventually bear the family name. The finished tiara is a genuinely remarkable object, set with 1,141 diamonds, including fine Golconda and Brazilian stones, weighing a combined total of roughly 48 carats, mounted in silver on gold in a design forming a near-complete circle. With diamond swags connecting a series of palm leaf motifs whose centers originally held pearls, with further pearls available to be mounted at the top of the tiara for additional height on especially formal occasions. The piece was worn by the 6th Marchioness of Londonderry at the coronation of King Edward VII on 9 August 1902, and Edith herself wore it, generally without the pearl additions. At her own influential gatherings at Londonderry House throughout the 1920s and 1930s, at the coronation of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth in 1937 at Westminster Abbey, and in one particularly well-known portrait photographed alongside her dog, an image that has since become one of the most reproduced depictions of the tiara in circulation. The same down diamonds also supplied the material for a wider parure, including the diamond stomacher already discussed, a diamond rivire necklace with a cross pendant, and a set of diamond bow brooches. The stomacher itself is a substantial piece of jewelry engineering, containing around 230 carats of diamonds, its largest single stone weighing 15 carats. All set in silver and gold across 3 tiers, each tier centered on a diamond flower, with a large single diamond forming the stamen, surrounded by scrolls and sprays of diamond rosebuds that taper gradually downward toward a pendant panel, finished with 3 spearhead-shaped drops and a central pear-shaped diamond. Designed with enough flexibility to be separated into 3 individual brooches when a full stomacher was impractical, it has remained one of the family's most photographed pieces across more than a century, from Teresa's formal 1889 and 1891 portraits through Edith's own appearance in it at the 1948 state opening of Parliament. Beyond the diamond suite, the Londonderry collection includes several sets with distinctly diplomatic origins. In 1821, Frances Anne received 14 exceptionally rare Siberian amethysts, sometimes called Tsar amethysts, as a personal gift from Tsar Alexander I of Russia, said to have been so struck by her portrait that he presented the stones as a token of admiration. She wore them at William IV's 1831 coronation, and the gemstones, sourced from Ural mining regions renowned for their deep purple hue with occasional red and blue highlights, remain treasured within the family for generations. In 1916, the jewelers Wolff & Company mounted the stones into a versatile new design capable of being worn either as a tiara or a stomacher. Edith had them made up as a tiara, but is said to have personally preferred wearing them as a more understated hair ornament, while a later Marchioness eventually had the stones restyled again as a necklace. Edith wore the amethyst stomacher and a large matching amethyst brooch at a grand reception on the eve of the opening of Parliament in November 1933. Paired the amethyst tiara with other jewels at a 1922 dinner held for King George V and Queen Mary, and even worked loose amethysts into the design of her hat for the 1922 wedding of Princess Mary, King George V's only daughter. Separately, the same Tsar Alexander gave Frances Anne a further collection of gemstones, including a pink topaz of roughly 140 carats and a yellow diamond of around 17 carats, both originally set as brooches and visible in her 1831 coronation portrait, mounted on a gold panel with the topaz positioned near the bottom center and the diamond slightly higher to the right. A turquoise parure, acquired in 1820 by the third Marchioness from Count Ferdinand Pliffy, an Austrian nobleman noted for his passion for turquoise gemstones, reflects the broader early 19th century European fashion for the stone, then widely believed to bring happiness and good fortune to its wearer, a belief common across much of Regency and early Victorian society jewelry. The set includes brooches, earrings, and pendants, each piece featuring 15 almond-shaped turquoise stones encircled by white diamonds, mounted in silver and gold. Frances Anne sewed selected pieces from the set directly onto her gown for William IV's 1831 coronation at Westminster Abbey, a common practical technique of the period for incorporating loose jewelry elements into formal court. Dress, and Edith selected the same parure for a series of family portraits with her daughters in 1926, while a later Marchioness wore one of its brooches in the 1960s. A separate parure, sometimes referred to by its historic association with the House of Guelph, the German royal dynasty from which Britain's own House of Hanover descended, consists of pearl and diamond jewelry acquired around 1821 during the third Marquess's diplomatic mission to Vienna, designed with enough flexibility to be worn as a necklace or a tiara, depending on the formality of the occasion. Teresa, the sixth Marchioness, wore it for portraits in the 1880s and later incorporated elements of it into her Empress Maria Theresa costume for the 1897 Devonshire House Ball, while Edith wore it repeatedly through the interwar years, including at the 1927 state opening of Parliament, where she styled pearl brooches onto her skirt alongside the Londonderry tiara and the diamond stomacher, combining three separate pieces from three different parts of the family's collection into a single, carefully coordinated appearance. In 1962, the pearl tiara from this set was worn by the Honorable Elizabeth Keppel, Edith's granddaughter, for her wedding at Brompton Oratory, extending the parure's active use into a fourth generation of Londonderry women. A final, equally diplomatic emerald parure necklace, earrings, and additional ornamental pieces set with emeralds believed to be of Russian origin was another gift from Tsar Alexander I to the third Marchioness during that same Viennese diplomatic mission in the early 19th century. Frances Anne wore elements of the set in one of her most celebrated portraits. Depicted richly adorned in diamonds and gemstones, and in the 20th century the parure passed down to one of Edith's own daughters before later being worn again by a descendant for a further family portrait, a continuity of use across at least 4 generations of Londonderry women. A pair of diamond and Burmese ruby earrings with a documented though photographically unconfirmed connection to Edith also passed through the family's collection before eventually being sold at auction for a sum equivalent to roughly $63,500 at 2021 exchange rates, one of several individual pieces from the wider Londonderry jewellery archive to have entered the open market in recent years, even as the tiara, stomacher, amethyst suite, turquoise parure, and Guelph and emerald sets have remained either within the family or on public display at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Much of the core Londonderry collection, unlike many comparable aristocratic archives that have been gradually dispersed at auction, remains either in family hands or held on long-term public display, principally at the Victoria and Albert Museum, where the turquoise parure, the Siberian amethysts, the Guelph parure, and the emerald parure are all exhibited, alongside occasional loans of the tiara and stomacher for major exhibitions elsewhere, including a notable diamond-themed exhibition at Christie's. That pattern of museum display rather than private storage or auction sale suggests a family that has, over the past several decades, made a deliberate choice to treat these pieces as a form of shared cultural heritage rather than purely private wealth. A markedly different path from collections that have been broken apart piece by piece through successive sales, such as those belonging to other aristocratic families whose jewels scattered entirely into private hands within a generation or two of their most famous wearers. Death, whether that pattern continues, will likely depend on the practical pressures facing any large aristocratic estate inheritance costs, conservation expenses, and the availability of family members willing to continue lending pieces for public display. But the family's history over the 20th century suggests a genuine preference for keeping the collection intact and visible rather than dispersing it. At the same time, individual pieces with a looser or less photographically documented connection to the collection's central figures, such as the Burmese ruby earrings sold at auction in the early 2020s, indicate that the family is willing to part with peripheral items even while preserving the core historic set. That distinction protecting the pieces with the clearest, most historically loaded provenance while allowing more marginal items to enter the private market may well be the model the family continues to follow going forward, preserving the objects most tied to specific coronations, diplomatic missions, and political moments while treating everything else as more ordinary, saleable property. Given how thoroughly documented this particular collection already is, through portraits, exhibition catalogs, and museum records stretching back nearly 2 centuries, its future seems considerably more secure than that of many comparable aristocratic archives, regardless of exactly which peripheral pieces eventually change hands. Looking further ahead, the collection's continued presence at a major national museum also means its future is, in a practical sense, no longer solely dependent on the fortunes of a single family. Museum conservation, cataloging, and public exhibition tend to outlast the personal circumstances of any one generation of owners, meaning that even if a future Marquess or Marchioness of Londonderry were to face financial pressures unknown today, the pieces already on long-term loan or display would likely remain accessible to the public regardless. In that sense, Edith's own instinct for using her jewelry as a form of public performance rather than purely private possession may end up being the very quality that ensures her family's most historically important pieces continue to be seen, studied, and appreciated for generations after her. Edith, Marchioness of Londonderry, understood something many of her aristocratic contemporaries never quite grasped: that a diamond stomacher worn to the right ceremony in front of the right people could say more about power, continuity, and political standing than any speech ever could. Given that Edith used pieces gathered from czars, Austrian counts, and royal gift-givers to quietly project political and social authority at the very heart of interwar Britain, which of the Londonderry jewels do you think best captures that unusual blend of diplomacy, dynasty, and deliberate display?